Thank you for joining us. I am Drew Armstrong, the executive editor of Endpoints News, and welcome to Post Talk Live. Now, what China's biotech rise means for the US is still undecided. But I also think that the biotech community deserves a deeper debate about China biotech. We want to break the biotech debate into pieces, understand them, air out the disagreements, and let you hear from the most important voices. For our next debate, and I think this is going to be a very, very good one, I'm very, very excited to welcome to the stage Peter Kolchinsky. Peter, come on up. He's the founder and managing partner of RA Capital. He's one of biotech's biggest investors. He's also the author of the essay, The Paradox of Biotech Protectionism. Fiona Murray, she is the William Porter Professor of Entrepreneurship at MIT. She's also the chair of NATO's Innovation Fund, and her work covers the intersection of technology, investing, national security, and geopolitics. And Jason Kelly, he is the CEO of Ginkgo Bioworks, former chair of the U.S. National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology. And we wanted to convene this. This is the social media panel that I've been alluding to. And
not me.
I'm very.
That's not me.
Not Fiona, yeah.
We're making biotech cool again.
Have stayed cleverly out of this, by the most part.
She's got like 1 million followers.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
We're going to continue the conversation, I think, by asking this group right away, what should the future of the U.S.'s relationship be with China's biotech sector? Peter, I'm going to start with you. We're going to give you about a minute to kind of state the premise of your argument. I've got a little timer over there. I won't adhere super strictly to it, but I am keeping vague watch.
Sure.
Let me start with you. What should our relationship with China's biotech sector be?
I think that ultimately we share a common enemy, disease. Somebody once said to me, like, are they our adversary or not? As if like that were the only thing we have to decide. It's more complex than that. We've got cancer and Alzheimer's and lots of other adversaries. And so, yes, China is kind of an adversary, but we have these other adversaries. And we collaborated with the Soviet Union on smallpox during the Cold War. They were an adversary, and yet that doesn't mean that you don't collaborate when you have a common enemy. So I think that it makes sense to friendshore manufacturing of all approved drugs. That serves two purposes. One, it denies our adversary, if you will, the ability to ever choke off Americans' access to medicines they actually rely on. And the second is it ensures that lots of expertise remains outside of China in the making of all kinds of modalities, which combined with our continued funding of NIH basic science means we're really bookending a lot of capabilities and ensuring our own resilience. But as far as R&D goes, let's keep collaborating on fighting off our common enemies.
Jason, I'm going to come to you next.
Okay, great. I'll start by saying you can definitely heckle me. I know Drew said that heckling's not allowed, but go for it. And I'll also probably curse more than Jake. Okay, so I'll give a little bit of context. For starters, I think I'm the China hawk here. I want to start by just saying I agree completely on the immigration things. I think the U.S. is built on that. I actually also did grad school here. I was over in Building 68. Majority of my colleagues at
and undergrad.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I should fully disclose. I was Fiona's undergrad research assistant back when about 20 years ago. Yes, thank you. How did I do?
I'll tell you later.
You're here, so
going over my time, Drew. Sorry. So I do think there's a number of things. Like we don't want to demonize the people of China. We should be stealing all the smart people and bringing them to the United States. That's always been the superpower of the United States. These are no-brainer things. We shouldn't waltz into that. But I would encourage you not to think that being strategic about where technology gets developed in the world means you have to be against having Chinese grad students here or something, right? Like those are not overlapping. So I want to point that out just to begin with. The thing I am worried about is where is the frontier of technology happening? So I had a chance to serve as a chair at the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotech. There was a similar commission, by the way, 7 or 8 years ago now, that Eric Schmidt was the chair of on AI. And the idea was, hey, this is an emerging tech. It doesn't work, but if it were ever to work, I really hope it starts working in the United States. What can we do to lay the groundwork for that to be the case? We need to make sure, and I will stop, and then we can talk more about it. The key thing to ask the question of is, where does the frontier of biotech and bioengineering live? I think we want to protect that and have it in the United States. I'm happy to talk about how to do that. But that is the key distinction that is my framing for this.
Fiona, you come to this from a very different perspective.
I do. So a few things. So first, I have had the pleasure, I think, of being living in the United States since 1999, being a professor here. As you could probably tell, I was not born here, but I have made this my home. And so I think, like many foreigners, choose to do have my life and research here. I also work very closely with NATO and national security communities, some in the United States, but particularly those across Europe. So the first thing I think I'd say is that not Chinese people, but China is basically designated as a peer adversary. That's not something that I get to decide. When I'm asked by NATO when we're making investments not to have adversarial capital in the startup companies that we invest in, that's not my designation, that's a designation of a set of governments. And I think what is distinctive at the moment is that China is a peer adversary. So what does that mean? That means it's a peer, it's a nation, a country that is absolutely at the frontier with us in many, many technologies. And it is an adversary as a government in many domains. And we see that repeatedly. You just have to see where drone technology travels, what is withheld and what is not. Does that mean, though, that we should decouple from China? Absolutely not. I don't think that's true. Should we use all the tools of economic statecraft to make sure that we have a resilient frontier life science sector? Absolutely. So I suspect that what you'll see is that across the three of us, we'll probably agree on all the kind of upside tools, the pro-competitiveness, make sure we have the best frontier. There'll be some disagreement about the kind of level the playing field tools, and then there'll be some discussion that I think we need to have about what you might call protectionism, which are there things that we do or don't want to do? And I'm happy to elaborate on the very narrow set of things that I think we have to stop.
And we will do that. Peter, I want to turn to you first. I mean, you have been, I think, a very active critic of barriers, to investment, and to the, anything that would kind of extremely cut ties. Can you explain that position and why you think that barriers like that don't work, whether it be biosecure, coins, anything like that?
Sure. So first of all, I'd love to just be able to do my day job like everybody else. I didn't wake up one day and say, I'd like to start talking about the importance of, collaborations with China and licensing deals. But, I'm plugged in enough to hear the, beginnings of new ideas. And when you hear an idea pop up like, oh, let's strengthen U.S. biotech by banning these, in-licensing deals, bringing in Chinese R&D into U.S. companies, I'm a creature of this ecosystem. I feel every incentive, every penalty, every disincentive, and my job depends on me ultimately balancing all of these factors and generating a good enough return that I get to keep doing my job, right? And so I instantly feel those things that would cause me to oh, well then I'm not gonna be able to do this. And what I hear people saying is, well, if we just ban you from doing these in-licensing deals, you'll be forced to invest in US companies and therefore support US innovation. And it's well, no, actually that's not at all what I would do. And so it makes me want to come out and say, hey, you've misunderstood me. If you're a zoologist studying an animal and you're speculating on what that animal would do if you did this or that, it's well, in this case, you're studying me and I speak. Just ask me, I'll tell you. And if there were...
Just out of curiosity, I want to pause on this because I think it's important. If there were a ban in place, what would how would this affect your behavior?
Sure, so I would respect it. It is a law, and I would not... we would not be meeting with Chinese companies, talking about how to take their seed programs. These are just ideas. Most of them will fail, but we would not be building a U.S. company and hiring American, people in ClinOps and discovery and all kinds of roles. We looked into it. we've got 200 portfolio companies. 12 of them are focused on assets that were licensed from China. Cumulative, about 300 American employees. We would not have those 12 companies. We would have 188 portfolio companies, right?
So are you saying that the marginal dollar you just wouldn't spend? So you just put it back in somebody's pocket, or what would you do? You've got a fund to spend.
So we would not be funding U.S. companies doing what, creating a version of that molecule, competing with that Chinese company. Why? Because that program that we identified was the best thing we could invest in with that marginal dollar. Now, there might be something lesser in the US that if it still exceeds our bar, we might fund it. So that's true, lesser programs. But within that disease area, and this is the thing, a lot of people think of biotech as like one competitive arena. There isn't. There's a competitive arena for mutant EGFR inhibitors for the treatment of lung cancer. There's a competitive arena for the treatment of Huntington's disease, particularly with this mechanism, whereas a symptomatic treatment might be a different competitive arena. We've got thousands of competitive arenas, and China is winning at some of them, and there are U.S. companies winning at other things.
Just to be clear, you are saying that marginal dollar would, even if it was a worse asset, would have to go back to a U.S. company if it's not going to the Chinese company, right? I mean, it might be. I'm just saying it might be worse for the development of the drug.
To be clear,
that's a
you're
different
right.
conversation.
We would invest in whatever the next
best thing,
if it exceeds the
Jake's
cost
point.
of capital.
Yes, there you go.
However, it is not at all a guarantee that there'd be very much between what we're investing in and our cost of capital.
Yep.
Right? And so if China indeed gets better and better and better at developing best-in-class molecules, then it doesn't result in us saying, well, let's just fund the US version of that. Because ultimately, if they do have certain advantages, if it's cheaper and faster to get to proof of concept data, and considering that all of Europe and Japan and everybody else would be free to license those molecules, I would have to contend with the fact that one day that drug is going to come what we call Euro-washed, just because it's fun to come up with a name, for stuff. It would come to the US as an offer from like Novartis. Anybody from Novartis here? Yeah.
We got one.
You would be like, would you like this drug? It cures this cancer. And it's got all this Western data, and by the way, it's manufactured, outside of China and all that. There'd be like no basis for saying no to that. And I would have to what? Count on some expansion of BINSA that would say, well, we're going to look through and look at like where the origin was. Oh, look, way back when it originated in China. Let's ban that cure to this cancer so that our U.S.
I'm happy to start arguing with this if you want to spice it up.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm waiting. You've got.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Okay,
let me just finish this. Okay. We would not believe that protectionism would ultimately stand in the face of patients demanding that cure. It's the most powerful lobbying force in the country. Patients demanding that cure for themselves, for their loved ones. We should keep an eye on the fact that that is what governs policy long term. And so whatever we come up with today, someday when that drug is being offered to the US, it will make it through and it will crush any lesser drug. So that's why the ban wouldn't work. And that's why I'm not in favor of a policy that simply wouldn't work.
I want to give Jason.
Right.
I want to give Jason and Fiona some time to weigh in here. And Jason, do you want to kind of, I think, walk us through how you think about some of these protectionist or prohibitory actions and where you disagree with
and
Peter
I'm glad we're going to this point. I think this is probably the most contentious point we have. And there's many things Peter and I do agree on, obviously. Maybe it's not obvious, but it is true. Okay, so the key missing piece of information when everybody's talking about how this stuff will never work, or wouldn't it be great to have electric cars from China? Sure, true. The key question to ask is what % of the worldwide market for pharmaceuticals originates with US patients and voters? 70%. Okay, and if you look at HHS study of new innovative molecules since 2020, 79%. All right? 79% originates in the United States. So you should think of the pharmaceutical industry, the other industry, by the way, where in the United States anyway, where 80% of the customer is from the US, is the defense industry. Okay? Pharmaceuticals is basically a US domestic industry. That is the key thing to understand. So, and it was said many times, we have nothing to worry about. Wherever you discover a drug, it will come to the United States. You know what the business plan of every startup in China is right now? sell their drug in the United States. So don't tell me for a second that we cannot control what gets into our own market. Of course we can. Of course
No,
we
we
can.
absolutely can't.
Yeah, that's complete nonsense. Of course we can.
70% reflects our need, our demand, our willingness to pay. That is, look, we may be 70% of the world's stuffed animal market.
We are not.
We don't make
so
money.
to give you a sense on automotive, we are 17% of the automotive market. We are 15% of the electronics market. So we don't actually, even though in those markets we do protectionism, believe it or not, for other national security reasons. Maybe you think they're misguided, but we still choose to do them. We have dramatically less power in those markets than we do in pharmaceuticals. It is almost, I believe it is actually unique among private sector markets how consolidated pharmaceuticals is in the US. And that is the switch you need to flip in your head when you hear all these arguments that are talking about the protectionism won't work. They come from industries that are global. Pharmaceuticals is not global. It is a US domestic industry.
So
Fiona, I wanna get to you,
so just if I can say, so look, I actually don't think whether you, so if we talk about these capital controls, right, let's make sure we know what we're actually talking about. We're saying that there is a question mark about whether we do something that people have described as reverse CFIUS. What's CFIUS? CFIUS is a way of understanding whether foreign money, foreign investors come in and control US assets. People have decided to call the opposite, which is US money going out and supporting assets in other countries, reverse CFIUS. It's not quite the same. It's more like a sanction kind of regime, which makes it very punitive, I think, and a very, very blunt instrument. But the basic idea is we don't want if you buy this argument, we don't want our venture capital dollars, or frankly, actually a much bigger number of pharmaceutical R&D dollars to be being spent elsewhere. It's not because we don't want those drugs to finally come. They'll come anyway. I actually think you're right that they will come. The question is, how do we want the marginal American dollar to be allocated? Now, people will say, look, private capital is not patriotic. I don't get up in the morning and decide to do irrational things to support the United States. That's true. Mostly that doesn't happen. But what does happen is that every single capital allocator gets to benefit from the rules of the road, the tax breaks, the capital gains breaks that we have, the R&D tax credits, the way we treat carried interest, and so on and so forth, which means that we then have to sort of think carefully about what does the government want us to do. And so I think if I'm sitting here giving advice to the US government, my view is basically that we have to think about this as an integrated system. It's already been said. The system is integrated. We can't forget manufacturing, and I say that looking over at Chris, who is with Kerry, super leading expert. We can't just say, oh, this is easy and what have you. We'll just let that go. I think none of us here think that's true. We need to be absolutely leading, focused, and I do think requiring for our resilience, making sure that things are made here, they're made with all the APIs and everything that you need to stand that up quickly. I think we probably all agree on that. Clinical trials, I was baffled when I learned the numbers about Australia. Why does it take half the time? We have to make that quicker. But also, why are we sending our very precious data abroad to places where we know that data is not always well respected? Not because the companies and the scientists are bad people, but they're coerced by the government. And we have evidence of that I think my colleague here from the agency, or formerly of the agency, would agree with. And then the nub of this comes down to discovery. It comes down to, would these sort of protectionist measures help us? I think in the short run, no. The question is, in 10 years' time, I've ever since I got this phone call asking me to do this, I've actually been thinking, I think it's a very hard question. And I actually think that this reverse investment rules are an incredibly blunt instrument for what we really need, which is largely to make this the absolute best frontier discovery set of activities in the world. I think there are many things we can do. I think fully banning a whole set of investment transactions probably does not make sense and is not the sharpest, most pointy instrument that we should be using to do this.
So Fiona, what does make sense? I want to ask you about this. So what is, I think I want to ask you two things, actually. One, you've studied lots of industries that are not biotech. Do they all think that they are special and unique in this way?
No.
No. And,
they don't think they're hamburgers either.
Yeah.
I mean...
But more seriously, what are the type of policies that you think do make sense that to kind of, I think, control the national interest here,
sure,
but without necessarily kind of cutting off the forward march of technology?
Right. So if you look at the CHIPS Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, that is, I think, a very good example, not because chips are exactly the same as they go with burgers, etc. It's because they are an integrated set of tools and methods that is trying to maintain the technological edge for the United States. And they use every tool at their disposal and try to align them as best possible. So we're doing all the pro-competition, be the best country we can be at this. We're also subsidizing production back into the United States, so back to manufacturing. We are providing incentives for testing and so on. And we're trying to maintain and actually increase the funding for basic research. There's a very, very narrow piece of this that says no export, no capital allocation to the absolute frontier of chips. If I told you that we were spending our venture capital dollars on nuclear reactors in Russia during the Cold War, or frankly in China now, or in drones, or in frontier semiconductors, many of you would be perturbed by that. But because it's medicine, I think we do think about it a little differently. And I'm not sure that's the right thing to do. So I would have a very, very narrow set of things that I would prohibit, that are absolutely at the frontier. And I would want to know what transactions are really happening, and I would require reporting.
Any sense of what those things would be? Like when you think national security, do you think them making, medicines for everything, or is it more like things related to the making of some, weaponized virus?
I mean, certainly things for making weaponized virus for sure, and I think we'd all agree on that. I think that we've already got a number of prohibitions on some of the AI investments, and I think investing in things that are absolutely at the frontier of AI and the life sciences is an area that I think is really worthy of understanding whether we should be doing that. I think that's potentially a source of hugely problematic outcomes.
But the development of an antibody against cancer. Antibody's not cutting edge. Cancer is pretty far away from some, weaponized virus.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, it's a biology risk.
Sure, right? It's tricky. I mean, you sort of can't quite have your cake and eat it in the sense that it's either super cutting edge, so we have to get it from there, or it kind of isn't, in which case it's not a threat. I mean, I would not put a huge blanket ban on things like that, no.
Peter, I want to ask you.
Neither would I.
I think a key thing, I need to add it. Biotechnology is a general purpose technology. So just so you understand, why I'm here. I was at MIT bioengineering department. I'm excited for everything you could do with genetic engineering. All right, I'm like a product of Jurassic Park. There's a whole world of interesting stuff that we could do with this technology. One of the uses, and the dominant use in the private sector today, is for developing medicine. And so what happens is whoever owns the private sector drug discovery industry, this was brought up by Jake earlier, owns where the people in this building go get jobs after this. If it's not here, we don't train those people, right? Like we're not just going to produce these people and have them not have any place to go. It's not going to happen. So what you're going to lose, is the frontier of genetic engineering. You know what AI can be used for? Curing cancer. Should we not worry about AI? Should the frontier lab, would be fine if the frontier AI labs were in China right now because they can be used for curing cancer?
I see
right?
Fiona
Like it is not a single-use
here.
technology. 30,000 letters of RNA killed 1.2 million people in the United States and grounded an aircraft carrier for the first time since World War II. Let's not pretend that biotechnology does not have the potential to be an instrument of geopolitical power. Of course it does. And so the frontier of this technology matters like the frontier of AI matters.
But Jason,
I'd love to hear
I think it's
Fiona
probably
say.
not. If you do this in the most blanket way, I think that the frictions and the chilling effect is so significant. I don't think we should do nothing, and we should just sit here
What does
and
it
say
chill?
it's all
So
absolutely
I think
fine.
what it will chill is basically the Chinese biotech startup ecosystem. What else are we worried about chilling?
I think that there will be significant. I actually worry, to be frank, I worry less about my VC friends, who I think will find the next cool thing to do. I worry about the big pharma companies, and I think that we should have a really hard set of questions about why it is that such a large amount of their money is currently being spent on things in China and not massively investing in the next set of AI tools and what have you to transform drug discovery here. But I think a completely blanket ban is a very, very blunt instrument. I think if we get really serious about this, absolutely, the frontier of gene sequencing technology, the frontier of cell therapy, certain kind of methodologies. I mean, you'd probably be able to write this list way better than I could because you think about this every day, and I think more about drones these days. But I think we have to be a little bit more. We need a less blunt instrument to make progress.
Peter, I want to come to you. I mean, do you think that what Jason is proposing could slow down the Chinese biotech industry or stop it, or has that been decided?
No, so Fiona made the point that you're going to get these medicines anyway. If we're specifically talking about adding biotech to coins, all it is US policy that deprives US companies of being able to do something that all other companies in the world would be free to do. So China's coming up with some ideas, some half-baked programs that have some potential. That is going to be a whole bunch of produce that all the other restaurants in the world will be able to pick from, except US restaurants won't, right, if you want the food analogy.
Who is going to fund that startup when it can't access the U.S. market?
Novartis will absolutely pick clean
Well,
everything
to
China
sell to
One
where?
guy from Novartis
To
shows
sell,
up. And
How are they going to sell to the U.S.?
Because Fiona just told you that they would.
How?
No, no,
just
no.
because she said that,
They're
what are you
allowed-
talking about?
Because they're allowed.
So,
No, no, because
so for
he
example,
thinks that they
Jason,
won't.
they won't. Yeah, because
they
they're a
won't
European country.
maintain
Yeah,
some-
Coins does not ban Novartis
It won't
from
buy the-
selling.
But that's because all these policies are sort of incoherent. They're like an incoherent
So-
government mishmash.
so we're here to
that
So,
doesn't really
for
help.
example,
We're
to
here
give you
to talk
an
about-
analogy from a different industry, connected vehicle
Jason,
rule.
so
hold on.
if
We're
you
gonna,
want-
hey,
Hey, man.
we're all talking over each other right now. We're gonna do quick. I'm gonna give Peter 30 seconds, Jason 30 seconds, Fiona 30 seconds. Peter, go.
If you're going to mix a whole bunch of words together, we're not going to make progress. If we're here to debate whether or not biotech should be added to coins, which is exactly what policymakers are debating right now, there's absolutely nothing that stops that policy from, nothing that stops Novartis from licensing whatever it wants, and AstraZeneca and every other ex-US company, developing it with Western data, manufacturing it anywhere, including the US, and presenting it to us as a completely Western product. And if it cures cancer, no one's going to say, oh yeah, we should ban that because way back when it came from China. So you can't invoke some other policy that isn't being considered to say, well, we'll magically find some way to ban all that.
Yep.
Right? So
Well, let me get it.
I
Thank you.
don't
That's my
believe
30
it
seconds.
would hold.
So,
Also,
okay, so your time's up. So I sure can. Okay, so again, what Peter's trying to convince you is this stuff is literally impossible. But what you should really understand is this is a political question for all of us here in the United States who are voters and patients. We get to decide this. And so to give you an analogy from a different industry, connected vehicle rule says that software originating in Russia and China, stated adversaries, cannot end up in a connected vehicle. In other words, in an autonomous car. And there's a set of rules. They come from commerce. It actually comes directly from
Why
the
not?
president. One executive order.
Why not?
No law. And that could be added.
Jason,
okay? And
explain
so
to
it's
the
very
audience why not.
straightforward. What?
Explain to the audience why not.
Why not what?
Why is that software not allowed?
Because it's coming from China and Russia.
Why?
Why is it coming from China and
No,
Russia? I don't know.
why
They're
is it not
developing-
allowed just
Because we
because it
consider it a
comes-
national security risk.
Why?
Because we want to have the leading edge of autonomy in the United States.
No, it's not.
Oh my
No,
gosh.
if
Look
you-
at listen, you're asking. All right, so Peter.
If you don't know the code, if you don't know the source code, and you don't
do know
trust
the
it,
source code,
then in
and-
that case you would be.
So the
skeptical
reason
of
why
it.
is because the president said an executive order that said it was a national security risk. That is
No.
exactly why.
No, dude,
What
this
are
is
you
the
talking about?
problem.
No,
You
no,
don't actually understand the root cause
I do.
of
All right.
these. No, you don't. as
Allow
you
me to
just
read it to
revealed.
you. It is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act from
know that.
1977.
We're
The
not
president
gonna-
is
we're
allowed to
not gonna read the
declare.
whole-
I'm just letting you know that I actually do know. And it was done in a very straightforward way. It was done about 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And you can read the executive order. And it will explain to you how the president
It so
passed
happens that
his
Fiona
power
knows.
to commerce
Can we let
and
Fiona
allowed
explain?
them to regulate.
You've
This is
gotten
something
way,
that
Jason,
should
Jason,
the president
you've gotten way
decide
more
that
than 30 seconds.
it's
We're going to
national
let Fiona
security
talk.
interests, we're able to do it. You
I'm
can't
not-
just thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, just because you're saying it's not possible
right.
doesn't mean it's not.
Let me let
Look.
Fiona weigh in here.
Right. So every single piece of technology will have a, I mean, look, having a technological edge is extremely important as a source of power in a very geopolitical world. The nature of the ways in which those technologies give us power is really distinctive technology by technology. If I have the ability to manufacture and spin up manufacturing extremely quickly, which is very, very difficult to do, that means that nobody can hold me hostage and not share medicines with me when I need them. If I have the capacity to do clinical trials very, very quickly, then in some adversarial sort of situation, I can neither have my data shared and you know, all the data that you have being used in nefarious ways. That's a very important piece of technological sort of power. In drug discovery, the way that we would think about this from a national security point of view is to say, if there's a next pandemic, if I don't have the next Moderna doing the really novel modality, I'm then going to be reliant on another country. When it comes to electric vehicles, we're basically worried that we're going to live in a movie where, as much as Huawei in our telecom system, there will be control over those things. The reason why we won't allow for leading-edge semiconductors to come from another country into our F-35s is for precisely the same reason, that we don't want there to be nefarious sort of ability
Exactly.
to disrupt those things.
We're worried that we don't understand some line of code and that in the present moment, it could be used against us. But just because China conceived of a molecule that looks like this, if Novartis is manufacturing that somewhere, in Ireland and sending it to us, there's nothing China can do about that molecule to all of a sudden weaponize it. And so
That's
these are
correct.
facile comparisons that
It's
you're
not
making.
a facile comparison.
Oh my
it is
God.
a
No,
national
that is the
security
definition
topic.
of facile.
It is not.
It sounds,
Yeah.
it sounds like it's relevant until you realize that it's not. Now, in terms of the threat of a pandemic, I'd like to address this. This came up on the prior panel, which was like a absolutely perfect amuse-bouche for this debate we're having. So I appreciate you guys raising this.
Even in
so
French.
Let's say a pandemic happens. Consider, we've already agreed that we should friend-shore manufacturing of all modalities, mRNA, et cetera. That's a lot of know-how that we would have to be able to battle a pandemic. Let's also agree that we should continue with NIH funding of the thousands of laboratories out there that have tons of vivaria and medchem and all kinds of...
We all agree with
Yes, NIH deserves a round of applause.
Yeah, agree.
So that's a lot of expertise, cutting-edge expertise. Let's consider that even when you have these smaller US teams that are formed around some asset license from China, they still have some medchem. They have some biologists, some people that even if maybe they're not doing the hands-on stuff in a wet lab, they're coordinating that work elsewhere. When you need to ultimately pool all your people between the laboratories, maybe even robot laboratories, and all the people that are coordinating this work to mount an offensive against a new virus, thinly spread across lots of companies, you'll be able to assemble them all and mount another Operation Warp Speed and manufacture all that you want. We are way more resilient, even if we come to lean on China for more of our work. And to be clear, we're talking about building an extra superhighway or continuing to enjoy the benefits of a superhighway that China's built. When you build a superhighway, you don't suddenly have no cars on all the other roads. Those roads remain just as clogged. You just have way more people traveling. That's how traffic works. So you've got discovery that has the backing of the NIH, and there'll still be some in the US, no matter how great China gets. Then you've got proof of concept work, early clinical. You necessarily have to have late-stage clinical in the US and Europe because you need Western data. You're going to have manufacturing in the US and Europe because we're going to mandate it. You're going to have governance mandated. So in other words, like, we can ban allowing a Chinese company to sell a drug in the US. We can require that any company selling a drug in the US be minority or even zero ownership if we want. These are just laws. And I don't care about the laws that govern ownership. I just care about maintaining R&D collaboration. So the only thing China is really widening is that proof of concept, maybe some discovery, some proof of concept work. And what it's resulted in is not a shift of dollars from the US to China. If you look at the actual math, China's done what, like $200 billion of biobucks in the last 5 years? That seems like a lot until you realize that it's about $12 billion of actual upfront payments compared to $500 billion of cold hard cash in M&A, actual acquisitions by pharma, and hundreds of millions of more billions of biobucks deals for partnerships. We keep conflating these biobuck Chinese deals with actual money spent. Like, China's adding a bit of extra bandwidth in some areas, some diseases, like lupus, right? Let's say thank you. Let's keep working on that. Those are our common enemies.
Is there a time limit
Peter,
on this?
I want to do something that Peter, I have a couple of provocative questions that I want to ask both you and Jason. And I think, listen, we referenced earlier tonight those 2 gene therapy trials where we had deaths in China. They weren't disclosed. I think you have to have real questions about the supervision that was going on there.
Yeah.
When you read about that stuff, what's your response to that as someone who wants to see more of this data come out of China?
My response is the same response that I would have to seeing misconduct anywhere in science. I hate it. I think that it undermines the public's confidence in science in general. And I would want to see a strong response from some governing body, from everybody, right? My own team, whenever we look at any program, we scrub it, top to bottom. If any of you guys run companies that have, come to us and experienced diligence, we're a pack of nerds. We'll pore over everything, and we hire attorneys to, confirm freedom to operate, make sure that a company is not violating patents. We'll look at the clinical data, the preclinical data. We do our part. And we hope that the medical institutions in China will do their part. What I've seen from China is a strong response, right? I have not seen as strong a response, I would say, at a national level to the kind of fraud that I've seen in the US. We don't have like a government response. They basically just say like, well, some investors lost money, they'll do more careful diligence next time. But China looks at it as like, oh, you did embryonic research that you shouldn't have, and you gene edited some kid. Like, nope, you go to jail. That happened to a researcher in 2018. And they've cut back on the number of IIT trials. Like, there's a downside to central planning. I don't like it. I was born in the Soviet Union. I hate that kind of approach to managing society. But when it comes to reacting when they see malfeasance in science, at the moment, I'm observing what China's doing, and I'm seeing a lot of tightening up in real time.
Jason, I want to ask you a question that I think has been brought up here. What would you tell a patient that couldn't get access to a drug or might get access to a drug more slowly, or that drug might be more expensive if it came from China? What's your response to someone who say, hey, I want this treatment and it's either unavailable, more costly, or arrives more slowly?
Yeah, so again, I think it's a false choice. I don't think you're going to see a vibrant startup ecosystem in China if we prevent the drugs from coming to 80% of the market. It's just not going to happen. And so that's a false choice. We can make this decision. I already explained it. I do think do not get tricked into thinking we don't have the power to do this. We absolutely,
how are you gonna do it?
Enough. You already said you talked for like literally you've talked for 5 minutes.
Yeah,
and said
so
nothing.
tell us how. Take some more time.
I already
how
explained
will you ban every
All
company?
right, we're gonna yeah.
You got to say how, Jason.
I literally just said how. Just calm down. It's fine.
How?
All right, relax. We already do it in plain commerce can do this.
No,
Okay, I already explained it, Peter. You don't win the argument by claiming it's impossible. It is our decision.
How?
Don't let people tell you that we don't have the power to do this in the United States.
How?
We absolutely do. All right, and so again, the thing we're not worried about here is not being blocked, from medicines or things like that. I agree. That's all largely about manufacturing. It is who controls the frontier of a technology that has uses well outside of medicine. All right, that is the key question. All right, and to be clear, the whole reason I got crazy about this was I was at a fundraiser back in December here in Boston. It was for this program that encourages underprivileged kids to get into biotech and all this stuff, and all these people are donating money at my table from pharma VC land and everything. And what's the topic at the table? Everybody bragging about their connections in China. And I'm like, but where are these kids going to work? Right? Like we're claiming, and this is meanwhile, our professed strategy for the industry is to offshore this. Like, this is like Detroit and automotive, all right? If you are here in Cambridge and you care about this stuff, you should be understanding that you have the power to influence this. And I'll make one more statement, because ultimately the people who really need to hear this, I do think, are the pharma companies. So the real touchy point for our industry, like, what's the big deal? The big deal is pricing. All right, it is this fact that US per capita spends 40 times what China spends. All right, and so here's two roads I could think that would sit well with me. All right, one, the US keeps paying for all the drugs like we do today, and the rest of the world, specifically including China, notably with 1.4 billion people, free rides behind our support of this ecosystem of people who discover drugs. That's road number one. Road number two, and we stop their ecosystem. It gets to be here. That's part of the deal. That's part of the deal with the American public for us paying for everything. The other road, absolutely, let's have an ecosystem in China. Great. Why doesn't China raise the price they pay for drugs to justify their domestic biotech and drug discovery
These
ecosystem,
are irrelevant,
like we
facile
have
arguments.
done as grown-ups in this country?
This
all
has
right?
nothing
and
to
so
do with
pick a road,
biosecurity.
and let me tell you, I'll tell you what is not. If I'm That's it, if I'm our Treasury Secretary. And I'm going out negotiating with China right now. This is a chip to put on the table. China wants this industry. We have control of this industry. Let's go down one of those two roads. Either you give us this back or you start paying, right? And that, by the way, either of those roads are great for U.S. pharma and great for U.S. biotech.
We are
Thank
over
you for
time.
the, I
I'm
saw
going to
the
give
hand
Peter.
clap there. You gave it to me, Matt. Thank you.
I'm going to give Peter fair time here and a few last words since we are 2.5 minutes over time. So Peter.
So you can't both call a country a free rider and then complain about how they subsidize all their R&D and make it cheaper and faster to develop drugs.
I didn't complain about that.
Right.
You never heard that come out of my mouth.
You call
Sorry,
it-
by the way, I've never said I care about the subsidy. Sorry.
you-
I care that we pay for the drugs.
Right.
Go ahead.
Let's
if a
keep it
country
rolling.
wants to spend money, they can spend money on whatever they want.
How much we pay for drugs is an indication of how badly we want them. All right? We want them badly. And there's a country that is pouring billions into trying to serve them up.
If that's what you think the view of the American
So-
voter
That's
is,
true.
Peter, I hate to break it to you.
And,
Yeah.
and to be clear, when they finally crack the code on a cancer, you still haven't explained to us how you intend to keep it from the people here in America who badly want it. So meanwhile, we've got most favored nation policy right now, which is causing American companies to not launch their drugs in Europe. That's a pretty big segment of the market for Chinese companies that are developing the third or fourth version of any given molecule. They will absolutely be able to survive and thrive as an industry, catering to all of Europe as our protectionist policies abandon.
All right.
Okay.
We're going to get, I'm going to, Fiona.
This is how the game theory of all of these policies come together. And you, except while I'm explaining how this backfires, you just say, we surely can. And then you don't explain how. And this is where the argument falls apart.
No.
How?
I-
But you literally have not described how. And the policymaker.
All right, we are going
But
to,
let's just
gentlemen,
be clear.
we are,
Let's
I'm
be
going to give
clear.
Fiona the final word
Right.
here because
You
we
can
are,
get
we
out
are
of this.
unfortunately. Fiona, take us home, please.
Okay. So I think in the reality of political decision making, this is not going to be a one and done decision. It either is or is not. This policy will neither get switched on or switched off. This is going to be a negotiation, and it's a negotiation that I think requires a really, really clear counterfactual. You've heard various from both the people either side of me, and I think each of their counterfactuals is somewhat flawed in various ways. It would take us a really, really long time to get into that, but what I will say is that for this to work, for us to have the absolutely leading edge industry all the way from discovery through to production so that we are not vulnerable, we are at the leading edge, we have the power to shape the society that we want to live in, all these tools have to be aligned. We have to promote this industry, we have to invest in this industry, but we do also have to know where our money is going. We should identify the transactions, we need to know where all the molecules that come into this country to be regulated by the FDA, what their provenance is, so we actually know what's going on. And we should start in a very narrow way to really control the way in which we invest in the absolute cutting edge. I think that should be extremely narrow, and that would be the political settlement I would start with. So I then don't actually have to get in quite that back and forth for now until I know more, because this is a very unfolding and rapid space. But let's use all the tools at our disposal in the most coherent fashion. At the moment, it is incoherent as a set of policy. And I do commend the National Security Commission on Biotech. It's really well worth reading. It's actually a very clear document. You might not agree with all of it, but it is laid out with all these tools put into place. So really, this is so important, I think. And Cambridge, Massachusetts, as one, its own nation practically in biotech, definitely should have a voice in this. So thank you.
All right, a huge round of applause.